Hi everybody, this is Dr. Ariana Anderson. I'm a naturopathic doctor at Anderson Family Chiropractic and Naturopathic Care in Waterville, Ohio. And we're going to talk a little bit today about blood sugar, so carbohydrate metabolism, and how it relates to mitochondrial dysfunction. So I'm going to share my screen here real quick. Okay, let's see here. I'm gonna have to move myself around a little bit. So this video is for educational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for individualized diagnosis and treatment by a qualified healthcare provider. Communications by Anderson Family Chiropractic and Naturopathic Care on our online platforms are not privileged communications and do not create a doctor-patient relationship. So I'm going to move myself up here. Hello, everyone. Move myself a little bigger. Hello, so you can see my face. So again, as I said, we're going to talk a little bit about blood sugar health and how mitochondrial dysfunction may contribute to this problem ultimately as more of an upstream problem. So first, we're going to talk just about some of the causes, some of the symptoms of unbalanced blood sugar. Poor kidney function, poor digestive function, decreased immunity, dysbiosis in the colon, skin disorders, and research has shown that long-term blood sugar handling issues can develop into diabetes. And most of us know that this is, it's just a continually rising problem in our society. And so this is definitely one area that we all need to focus on and learn more about. So some of the things that might indicate that this is an issue, if you're getting fat around your waistline, if you're hungry between meals, if your eyesight is getting blurry, do you suffer from poor circulation or numbness in your hands or feet, and are you waking up multiple times per night and not waking refreshed? Some of these things can be contributed to blood sugar metabolism issues. And they can be early signs of instability in this area and the beginning of type 2 diabetes. So it's definitely something that it would be wise to look into and talk to your qualified healthcare provider about. But by supporting healthy blood sugar levels, you will lay the foundation for normal processes that will keep those unwanted symptoms controlled. We really do have a blood sugar crisis in America. Some of you may or may not have heard of the name Metabolic Syndrome. And it is your risk for heart disease, diabetes, and stroke increases with the number of metabolic risk factors such as a large waistline, which I already mentioned, high triglyceride levels, low HDL cholesterol level, high fasting blood sugar, and high blood pressure. So when we have a combination of those things, oftentimes it's indicated that there could be something going on. It's called metabolic syndrome. So due to the rise in obesity rates among adults, metabolic syndrome may overtake smoking as the leading risk factor for heart disease. It is possible to prevent or delay metabolic syndrome, mainly through lifestyle changes. The majority of the issues that we face in our society, it really has a lot to do with our lifestyle and environmental stressors. So, it's hard to see there, but blood sugar and the belly fat connection, that's what that says up there. You may have heard that is a factor, and it is. And this is why. So when blood sugar levels become elevated, insulin is released into the bloodstream, and it moves the excess sugar to cells for energy. The remainder is stored in fat cells for future use, and mostly that is around the abdomen. And so that's why oftentimes when people have this issue, they'll have some excess belly fat. Fluctuated blood sugar levels lead to insulin resistance, which causes the pancreas to flood the bloodstream with more and more insulin, resulting in greater fat storage and hypoglycemia, which is low blood sugar. This explains why we may feel hungry again so soon after eating a meal rich in easily absorbable carbohydrates. So this is just a little slide to kind of show insulin resistance and sort of the cycle around it. So we'll eat food, your body will make insulin. The cells, unfortunately, in this situation, resist insulin. And so that excess sugar is stored as fat, and we start to feel more tired and hungry. And then, of course, what's one of the things we do that makes ourselves feel a little better, right? Comfort food, so eat more. And you can see how that cycle just kind of keeps going on and on. One interesting statistic is that the average person in 1700s ate about 4 pounds of sugar per year. Today, 25% of us consume over a half of a pound of added sugar daily, which is 180 pounds of sugar per year. This is why it's one contributing factor to why 1 in 4 Americans is either pre-diabetic or has type 2 diabetes. And by the way, the Metabolic Syndrome, which I had mentioned previously, some of the current statistics is that just shy of 50% of people have that problem. So, and it is definitely characterized by having carbohydrate metabolism issues. So we're going to jump in and talk about some new information that I haven't actually presented on before today. So we're going to talk a little bit about some sugar consumption statistics. This is actually Dr. Elliot Joslin. He was the founder of Boston's Joslin Diabetes Center. He published these some statistics almost a century ago, and what he found was that yearly sugar consumption per person in the U.S. had increased 8-fold between 1800s and 1917. He noted that consumption of sugar had increased 17%, but what was interesting is that the death rate from diabetes had nearly doubled in the same time period. And so these statistics, actually, I got these from a book called The Invisible Rainbow by Arthur Furstenberg. And one interesting point that he had made was that that the statistics were only for refined sugar, and at that period of time, more people ate molasses and other sugars such as honey, sorghum, and maple and cane syrup because they were less expensive than refined sugar. So he actually went back and pulled the data again with those figures in mind. And what's interesting is that there was a lot more sugar being eaten than was being reflected in the original statistics by Dr. Joslin. And so this is the statistics with other caloric sweeteners taken into consideration in between 1822 and 2014. What's really fascinating is what I really want you to note is this right here. In between 1920 and 1980, notice, in fact, per capita sugar consumption did not rise at all between that period of time, yet diabetes rates had actually soared tenfold. So that, I think, is very interesting, and it gave me a minute to consider, because in my mind and in my education, usually the culprit's sugar, and I am not in any way saying people should run out and eat a lot of sugar. We definitely, absolutely eat too much sugar and too much, synthetic everything. And so there's definitely an issue with the diet, but this was interesting information because it indicates that perhaps sugar consumption alone is not the only contributing factor to diabetes. So this is also interesting, some yearly prevalence of diabetes. So this on the left, we have the death rate from diabetes in the United States between 1850 and 2017. Now, note that in 1949, the drop in mortality is actually due to a reclassification on death certificates. Prior to this, deaths due to heart disease and diabetes were actually classified as diabetes, but starting in 1949, those deaths were now reported as heart disease. And so that got shifted. So you'll notice here in between 1940 and 1950, there was a drop, but it's not because there was a drop in diabetes, there's just a drop in the reporting. And so we actually wouldn't know how many of those deaths were related to diabetes because they were being reported as heart disease. Now, over here though, this will actually give us a better indication of where there were cases. So these are the diagnosed cases of diabetes in the United States, and they have just steadily risen year over year. Even though Americans have made changes in diet, exercise, and are using a variety of different medications, and efforts to help this problem. And as you can see, in 1917, just a little over, just about 2 cases and per 1,000. And you can see all the way into 2015, 72 cases. So year over year, it just continues to grow, which is, you know, it's a real problem. So one thing we're going to talk about today, which I'm not sure if you guys have ever heard this about this particular thing before, but Philip Randall was a chemist at the University of Cambridge, and in 1963, he proposed what he had called the glucose fatty acid cycle. What he was saying with this is that glucose and fatty acids compete with each other for energy production. This competition operates independently of insulin to regulate glucose levels in the blood, and that high fatty acid levels in the blood will inhibit glucose metabolism and vice versa. So he was the first to propose that, and since then there were actually there's been many studies on the glucose fatty acid cycle. But the next year, of course, there were some scientists who dove in and decided they wanted to test this. So, and this is Jean-Pierre Felber and Alfredo Venati at the University of Lausanne in 1964, so 1 year later. And this is how they did it. And this has been repeated. So this is actually pretty easy to confirm. They had 5 individuals, and they gave them each a glucose tolerance test. And then a few days later, they had given them intravenous infusion of lipids or fats. So they added fats to their bloodstream, and then they did another glucose tolerance test. And what they found in all 5 was that their insulin levels actually remained the same in both tests. However, the second test, they responded as though they were insulin resistant. So when they had elevated blood fats, they had limited ability to metabolize carbohydrates. And so in conclusion, they were unable to metabolize glucose as efficiently in the presence of these high levels of fats. And so this concluded that they do in fact compete for the same respiratory enzymes, which is very, very interesting. Now, diabetes and the glucose fatty acid cycle. Now, I'm going to tell you guys, I'm going to get into a little bit of sciencey stuff. Stay with me because it is really important. I'm going to get into some things that I think are actually some of the upstream environmental stressors on our cells causing some of these problems. So I'm going to try to break this down and make it interesting, but I'm just going to forewarn you, a couple slides here, a little bit sciencey, but we'll make it through. So stay with me. So David Kelly at the University of Pittsburgh and Jean-Aime Simoneau at Laval University in 1994, they were able to measure cellular respiration in detail with diabetes. And what they found was that there was a defect. The defect was not the cell's ability to absorb lipids, but rather in the cell's ability to burn lipids for energy. So the lipids did absorb into the muscle cells, but then they were not metabolized, which is interesting. This finding spurred much more research into cellular respiration as it relates to diabetic patients. So these are the things that they found, and it's kind of important. So 1, cellular metabolism is reduced at all levels in the diabetic patient. Number 2, enzymes associated with the Krebs cycle, and I know some of you guys are having flashbacks to biology class. I promise it won't last for long. So this is kind of important. Associated with the Krebs cycle are impaired. And so that is how we break down basically amino acids, fatty acids, and glucose for energy. It's, you know, some of their, they've been already broken down a little bit before they get there. So, but that's basically what's happening in that, but that's impaired. The electron transport chain is also impaired. And then mitochondria are smaller and reduced in number. And consumption of oxygen during exercise is greatly reduced. And then more severe the insulin resistance, what they found is that they would have more severe reduction in cellular respiratory capacity. So there definitely is a correlation with mitochondrial function, because that's where all of this is happening. All right, so mitochondria and diabetes. Mary Elizabeth Hattie is a professor at Harvard Medical School and a researcher for Joslin Diabetes Center. And then she was working with Sylvia Corvera, which is a professor at University of Massachusetts Medical School. And they published a comprehensive review of existing research on the role mitochondria may play in diabetes. And they published this in 2010. And what they found was that a defect of cellular respiration may be the basic problem behind the modern epidemic of diabetes. And this is due to failure of mitochondria to adapt to higher cellular oxidative demand, which causes a vicious cycle of insulin resistance and impaired insulin secretion that can be initiated by that. And so, another sciencey slide, I know, but it's important because I think that what we're seeing here in all of these studies is that the upstream problem is stress on our mitochondria. And so that's the powerhouse of our cell. If they're not functioning right, then we're going to have a hard time with life in general. And so, and all of this research really is pointing to dysfunction of the mitochondria. So specifically with the electron transport chain, all right, and this is how it relates to diabetes. So Martin Blank and Reba Goodman in 2009 published a study that was about electromagnetic fields and how they stress living cells in pathophysiology. And what they suggest is that altering function of any of the elements of the electron transport chain, the final combustion of our food will be impaired. And what they also saw was that the speed of electrons can be modified by electromagnetic fields. So this is interesting, and we're going to get into this a little bit more. This is the idea of electromagnetic fields potentially inhibiting our electron transport chain, which actually makes sense. And they've actually seen in studies that this does occur. So the result is that what they saw is that proteins, fats, and carbohydrates begin to compete with each other, and they start to back up in the bloodstream. So glucose then gets excreted into urine, and then fats will start to be deposited in and around the body and in the arteries. And then your brain, heart, and muscles become oxygen deprived because of that. So could there then be an environmental cause? And so Arthur Furstenberg, who wrote The Invisible Rainbow, again, I think that everyone should read it. This was a quote that he had said was, exposure to electromagnetic fields interferes with basic metabolism. The power plants of our cells, the mitochondria, become less active, slowing the rate at which our cells can burn glucose, fats, and proteins. So some studies that can support this conclusion, and I know this is getting into a lot of studies, but this is a new concept, and I think anytime you're looking at something new, it's important to do your own research and look at some of the studies and the evidence-based conclusions that are out there. And so this is I'm just giving you some of the ones that I thought were primarily important in my research. So there is the first one. This was done in 1962, and they consecutively come closer to newer studies. But the first one I'm noting is in 1962, and that study was the effect of microwave radiation in the meter and decimeter wave ranges on endocrine regulation of carbohydrate metabolism and the functional state of adrenal cortex in rabbits and goats. And the conclusion in that particular study was that rabbits exposed to low-level radio waves showed blood sugar being raised by 33% in less than 1 hour. That's pretty amazing and a little bit concerning, because I can tell you back then, the amount of electromagnetic fields that we were around are significantly less than now. Now, here's another one. In 1982, hygienic evaluation of biological effects of non-ionizing microwaves. And so what they found was that the amount of sugar in urine was in direct proportion to the dose of radiation and the number of times the animal was exposed. So the more radiation you have, the more sugar that is being excreted in the urine, and that is indicating that there is sugar in the blood not being utilized, right? So also in 1994, basic behavioral and endocrine effects of microwaves and non-thermal intensity. What they found was that insulin levels in rats decreased 15% when exposed to 30 minutes of radiation. This increased to 50% in rats exposed for 12 hours to pulse radiation at a power level of 100 microwatts per square centimeter. Now, that's also amazing, and keep note that the level of exposure is comparable to the radiation a person receives sitting directly in front of a wireless computer, which I'm doing right now, and considerably less than what a person's brain receives from a cell phone. So the next study was published in 2011, and it was titled GSM Mobile Phone Radiation Suppressive Brain Glucose Metabolism. This was actually pretty interesting. What they found using a positron emission tomography, which is a PET scan, on the brain, they found that glucose uptake is considerably reduced in the region of the brain next to the cell phone. So what this indicates is that there is some correlation between electromagnetic fields and our ability to metabolize glucose in the brain. This next study was in 2012. This is a pretty interesting one because it was done over a long period of time. It was a prospective study of in utero exposure to magnetic fields and the risk of childhood obesity. What they found and confirmed was that electromagnetic fields are associated with obesity in children. What they did was they had pregnant women wear meters to 24 hours a day to measure exposure to magnetic fields during the average day. And then the children of those women, they found, were more than 6 times as likely to be obese when they were teenagers if their exposure was over 2.5 milligauss, which was the highest exposure in the group of women that were monitored. So keep in mind, they measured them while they were in utero, and then they studied them when they became teenagers. And also keep in mind, it is likely that the children continued in the electrical environment that their mothers were in through their teenage years. So although this was not part of the study, it is possible that EMF exposure continued to affect them and their blood sugar throughout their teenage years, and it wasn't just isolated to when they were in utero. But I think that that was a very important study, that needs to be considered for women who are pregnant, and also about how much screen time and computer time our children are having, especially right now with a lot of this distance learning. It appears in these studies that an increased amount of electromagnetic fields do have an impact on our cells and our ability to metabolize carbohydrates and fats. This is an interesting slide. So Arthur Furstenberg in that book I mentioned, The Invisible Rainbow, that he went and found the rate of rural diabetes in both 1931 and 1940 and correlated it to the percent of electrification in both of those years across the United States in these different states. What's interesting is you can note that there is definitely a correlation between rate of rural diabetes and electrification of those particular states. I don't know what's going on in Arizona, but they obviously are doing something right. But every other state, as you can see, their percent of rural diabetes increases, because you can see in 1931 the scale goes up to 26, and in 1940 it goes up to 44, and most of the states have been moving in that direction. So more electrification and more incidence of diabetes. Just an interesting note on that. And also, the reason why he did it of these 2 years is that the U.S. rural electrification program started in 1931 and went through 1940. So that was one of the biggest bursts of electrification in our country, was in that time frame. So if there is, in fact, a global stressor with electromagnetic fields, then animals would be affected too, right? And we do actually see that clinically. This particular study was published in 2011, and it was titled Canaries in the Coal Mine, a cross-species analysis of the plurality of obesity epidemics. So what they found, they confirmed that overall increase in weight of over 8 species of animals, both domestic and wild. They actually tested 24 populations of animals across the 8 species. Over 20,000 animals were analyzed, and those were lab animals, house pets, feral rats, etc. And every single one average weights rose over time. And the odds of that happening by chance are less than 10 billion to 1. So there definitely is something, some global stressor that is stressing not just humans, but animals in general. And we are seeing increased weights across the board. Now, that does challenge the old wisdom that fatness is solely due to lack of exercise and poor diet. Now, I'm not saying that that doesn't play a role, because it does. It definitely does. We need to focus on our diet. We need to focus on exercise. Those are key points, and we'll talk about those in a minute. But it does suggest there is some other global environmental factor involved. And this shows you the results of that particular study. You can see that's average weight gain per decade. And so you can see in the chimpanzees, interestingly enough, 33.6% increase per decade. Wow. And they're, of course, most closely related to, in genetic makeup to humans compared to some of the others. We have rats on here and some mice, but all of them are in between 5% up to 33% increase in weight gain per decade over those decades that have been analyzed in each one of those. So that's pretty amazing over time. So one last example, because I just thought this was fascinating, and it's a real world example. There's not a lot of places on Earth that aren't electrified, right? Right now, so it's a little bit difficult to go out and do research on this idea. But this is actually one. It's a Himalayan kingdom called Bhutan, and it's about the size of the Netherlands, and it's located between India and China. Until 1960, it had no banking system, no national currencies, no roads. In the 1980s, it had a population of over 750,000. It had a limited road system. Most travel outside the capital was on foot or on horseback. So there were, cars and things like that, not much at all outside the capital. Limited outside visitors, only 1,000. They'd only let 1,000 visitors in a year, so they didn't have a lot of outside influence of Western society and whatnot. And they didn't have any electricity. They did a lot of wood burning and things like that for heat. And diabetes was extremely rare and never occurred outside the capital. In 1998, there was a change. Their king gave some power to the Democratic Assembly, which in turn decided to modernize their society. And so between July 2002 through 2012, 84% of their rural households were reached with electricity. So in that 10-year period of time, a demographic of people that had no electricity whatsoever very quickly were reached with electricity in their homes. So this shows you in 2004, they had 634 new cases of diabetes. Now keep in mind that prior to 1998, diabetes was extremely rare. But there was no deaths at this point. 2005, 944 new cases, no deaths. 2006, 1,470 new cases, no deaths. 2007, 1,732 new cases, no deaths. And then in 2008, 2,541 new cases, but now we have 15 deaths. And in 2010, there were 91 deaths from diabetes, and that was their 8th leading cause of death at that point. So within 10 years, they went from having no diabetes to it being the 8th leading cause of death. And so it's not just their food, because a lot of people have speculated on that. But the problem is that they're a very poor country, and they still have a lot. They still eat a very the diets that they've had, for the centuries prior. They haven't changed a lot in their diet. And so really the one thing that was the major change is that they brought electricity into their homes. And I just think that's very interesting, because it's a case that we can actually see that happened very, very recently. And it happened over a 10-year period of time. So what can we do about it, right? These are just a couple examples. Obviously, with people that come in as patients, we work with each individual because everybody's different. And so we customize our programs to each person that comes in. But these are some general recommendations for people that may be watching and maybe are not patients of this office, or maybe they live quite a ways away. So the first thing is we need to manage that glucose fatty acid cycle, which I mentioned that when you have elevated glucose in the blood, you're going to have a hard time digesting or metabolizing fats. If you have a lot of fats in the blood, you're going to have a hard time metabolizing glucose. I think one nutritional strategy that has been really helpful for a lot of people, it's easy to find. You can see this this cookbook up here, the Trim Healthy Mama's cookbook. It's real simple. It's not difficult. And honestly, I would get their cookbook because they have an executive summary of the protocol in the very beginning of it, and then there's a million recipes that you can follow. Just to give you a real quick synopsis, and I really encourage you just to get the book. I have no stakes in this whatsoever. I just think it's a helpful resource. But just a real quick synopsis of how it works is you eat food, either S or E meals typically. And so what they mean is S means a satisfying meal and E means an energy meal. A satisfying meal is one that's high in fat but low in carbs, and an energy meal is one that is high in carbs but low in fat. And so by doing this, you're going to eat every 3 to 4 hours, but if you switch between those two types of meals, you need to make sure you have 2.5 to 3 hours between them so that your bloodstream can clear out either the glucose or the fat. And so then you can have the next meal. So like if you had a satisfying meal, you want to wait at least 2.5 to 3 hours before you have an energy meal. And that way you don't have competing glucose and lipids in the bloodstream. And that helps with that. Always drink half your weight in ounces of water per day. That's super important. You need that for literally a million reasons. So I just kind of sneak that in. And then two other things you can think of, which really, and there's a resource on the next slide, things that you can, books that you can look in that will give you more information on this. But the first one is intermittent fasting. Basically what that is, if you're not familiar with it, it's just limiting your feeding window. So you're still going to have the calories that you need for your day, but instead of having them all day long, you're going to have them in a limited window. And so this says like 6 hours is the feeding window, and then you have 18 hours where you're kind of fasting. And what this does is it puts you in a state of autophagy. And what that means is your body starts to break down unnecessary cells. But what it also does is it helps to stimulate mitochondria in your cells. And they have actually done studies that show that does have that effect on the body. So we can start to have more mitochondria in our cells. And so, like, for instance, if you did like a 6-hour feeding window, that would be like, say, for instance, like I do this myself, not all the time, but I sometimes will have a month where I commit to doing this, and it's for my health. And so for me, I will have in between 10 and 4. So I might have breakfast at 10 and then lunch at 1 and dinner at 4. And then I have an 18-hour cycle where I'm giving my body time to rest and recover and enter into that stage of autophagy, which has been very well researched, by the way. And I can't remember his name, but there's a fellow that got a Nobel Prize for his work around the benefits to that metabolism. So that's number two. And then high intensity interval training. Now there's another book I'm going to talk about in the next slide that gives you some more ideas around how you can do this on your own. Now I have also used myself, a Dr. Tata, I believe is his last name, and he has an exercise program that is similar to this called it's metabolic aftershock or metabolic renewal. And basically what it is you do some really high intensity activity for a period of time, and then you let your body rest, and then you go really hard and you let your body rest. This particular style of exercising has been shown to help increase efficiency in mitochondria, as well as elevate certain hormones such as growth hormone in the body and other hormones and antioxidants. So those are the three things that I would say are the best overall strategies to help with this particular issue. And of course, obviously, we can help with more specific things that if you have other issues that are complicating this. Also, it's looking from research that really electrical exposure is part of the problem. It's not going away, folks, as I sit here on my computer, right? And so what we really do need to do is try to reduce our electrical exposure, find ways to be a little more clean in the way that we go about our life and not having a lot of dirty electricity everywhere. Like for instance, just your cell phone. I mean, it emits. It's a computer. It emits a lot of radiation. But we use in our family, we use safe sleeve radiation cases to help to limit that. But there's many other options out there, and so I would highly encourage you to look at some of those options. Any of the patients in our office, if you are interested in this particular brand, the safe sleeve radiation, let us know. We do have a discount code that you can use when you're purchasing those. And so now I will say a lot of times people talk about, like, I don't really advocate for people to, put themselves in like Faraday bubbles. I don't think we want to be afraid. This is really important, especially right now. It's not about being afraid. It's about just becoming educated and finding strategies that can mitigate some of this exposure. And so, you can't walk around in a Faraday bubble. And honestly, it wouldn't be a good idea, because not only, yes, a Faraday cage would keep things out, but it would also actually reflect your own radiation that comes off of you. So we're not made to be in a bubble. We're made to be out. We're made to be interacting with the environment around us. So another thing you could actually do is grounding, where you go out and really take your shoes off and walk on the earth. There's a lot of negative ions that come off the earth, and so that can actually be helpful too for those of you that are very electrically sensitive. All right, so these are a couple books I recommend. Obviously, The Invisible Rainbow I mentioned a couple times by Arthur Firstenberg, and all of these are out on Amazon. You can get them very easily. The second one is Metabolic Autophagy. That one talks a lot about obviously intermittent fasting, and it talks a lot about exercise and the role of how to help our bodies cleanse themselves and increase mitochondrial health. He specifically talks about that in that book. It's a good one. And also Fat for Fuel by Dr. Mercola. Also a really great book. He gets into a lot more detail around what happens at a mitochondrial level and how to support that. In his book, it's he's recommending more of like a whole food ketogenic type of a diet, which can also be helpful as well. He recommends cycling that, not doing it all the time, but cycling it. So that is also an option. And so I hope that this information was valuable to you. Please let us know if you have any questions or comments. We love to hear from all of you, and I hope that you guys have a wonderful night, and talk to you soon.